Hello, we're the third group of BSC 11 and in this video, we will look back at the third world as it relates to the history of the international system or the global interstate system. Let us begin with an elaboration of what the third world is.
People often use the term third world as shorthand for poor or developing nations. By contrast, wealthier countries such as United States and the nations of Western Europe are described as being part of the first world. But where did these distinctions come from, and why do we rarely hear about the second world?
The term Third World was originally coined to describe that we're not aligned with either the West or NATO or North Atlantic Treaty Organization or the East, the Communist Bloc. The term is now commonly used to describe the developing countries of Africa, Asia, Latin America, and Oceania.
The three worlds model of geopolitics first arose in the mid-20th century as a way of mapping the various players in the Cold War. The origins of the concept are complex, but historians usually credit it to the French demographer Alfred Sauvy, who coined the term Third World Tiers 1 in a 1952 article entitled Three Worlds, One Planet. In this original context, the First World included the United States and its capitalist allies in places such as Western Europe, Japan, and Australia. The Second World consisted of the Communist Soviet Union and its Eastern European satellites. The Third World, meanwhile, encompassed all the countries that were not actively aligned with either side in the Cold War. These were often impoverished former European colonies and included nearly all the nations of Africa, the Middle East, Latin America, and Asia.
What is the Third World?
Throughout the history, the term Third World has been used to describe a group of economically developing countries. It is one of the four segments used to classify the world's economies by economic status. Third World falls behind the First and Second World but was ahead of the Fourth World, although Fourth World countries are hardly recognized at all. Third World may also refer to countries with high mortality rate as well as unstable and inconsistent economies. Third world countries often accumulate large amounts of debt from more industrialized countries due to the constant aid they require to keep their economy afloat and provide some financial stability to their citizens. A developing country, an underdeveloped country, or a low and middle income country, or LMIC, are the terms that are used nowadays.
Low gross national income (GNI). Third world countries experience low economic development and high rates of poverty. For the 2015 fiscal year, low-income economies such as those in Tanzania, Haiti, and Cambodia are defined as those with GNI per capita of less than $1,045 in 2013. The GNI for high-income economies such as the United States is $12,746 per capita. Second, economic dependence of other countries. Developing third world countries, as a result of the state of their economies, rely heavily on more economically and technologically advanced countries. And third world countries' economies, which for the most part lack modernity and independence, are typically geared towards serving and are controlled by more developed countries. This imbalance of control and dependence widens the gap between the wealthy countries such as the US and the low-income economies such as the Cameroon.
Third is Low Human Development Index. The HDI measures three basic dimensions of human life: knowledge, a long and healthy life, and a decent standard of living. The United States ranked 5th in the HDI scale, while a developing country such as the Democratic Republic of Congo is ranked 186th. Fourth is the lack of political rights and civil liberties. Developing countries such as Sudan is war-torn, wherein civil liberties and rights are almost non-existent in the wake of violence and war crimes. Citizens of the US experiences a life that is on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, with basic rights such as the right to an education is strongly in place. There are other indicators to classify a country as third world, and not every developing country possesses these characteristics. Millions of people live in countries where daily life is excruciatingly difficult. If wealthier nations stepped in and did more to help third world countries, the term would surely fade as the effects of extreme poverty were alleviated.
The following are some examples of third world country. The first one is Mexico. Mexico, by historical definition, is regarded as a third world country because Mexico did not align with NATO or the communist bloc following World War II. By the current definition, Mexico is a developing country. Poverty and lack of basic education are both issues throughout Mexico as well as the underdeveloped neighborhoods. However, Mexico has an institutionalized government, a law system, public healthcare, public education, and infrastructure. India. India is considered to be a third world country and is also a developing country today. India has high poverty rate, corruption, an outdated caste system, and other significant issues that have stunted its development. India is part of BRICS or BRICS, an acronym for the Association of 5 major emerging national economies. These are the Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Brazil. Brazil is considered a third world country and also a developing country today. Brazil is part of BRICS and has the largest economy of any country in South America and Central America. However, Brazil has a low BDP per capita, low living standards, and high births and death rates.
Another international country is China. China is a second world country by historical definition as it was part of the communist bloc. China is a developing country today and is part of the BRICS. Although China is one of the world's largest economies, there is a huge income gap, widespread poverty, and a slower urbanization rate than that of developed countries. Next is Thailand. Thailand did not initially join the Allies or the communist bloc. It is a third world country. Thailand is considered to be a developing country, or more accurately, a new industrialized country. This means that Thailand has advanced further relative to other countries but has not yet reached the level of modern industrial nations such as the Western nations. A large part of Thailand is still poor and rural. Next is Jamaica. Jamaica is both a third world country and a developing country. Jamaica's economy is considered an upper middle income economy but is one of the slowest developing economies and depends on tourism, mining, and agriculture with no significant industrialization. Jamaica faces high poverty levels as well. Last is Peru. Peru is a third world country historically and is currently a developing country. Peru has a widespread poverty and lack of education among the masses. Luckily, the economy has improved in recent years due to economic initiatives, international loans, and infrastructure projects. Still, it seems as though Peru will need a few decades to become a developed country.
Why is the Philippines considered a third world country? The Philippines is historically a third world country and currently a developing country. The following are the main reasons why the Philippines is still classified as a third world country. The Philippines lacks an advanced infrastructure. Lack of infrastructure has been a significant stumbling block to Philippines' economic growth and poverty reduction. The Philippines is developing economy. According to Investopedia, the Philippines is very much a developing country and it has a long way to go to reach developed status. Moreover, the country's infant mortality rate is very high. Its industrialization is minimal, and many of its citizens lack access to quality healthcare and higher education. The Philippines has low quality of life. According to the Manila Times 2020, the Philippines, represented by Manila, was ranked 54th out of 56 participating cities worldwide in 2019. Manila, Philippines is no longer ranked 54th in the mid-year 2020 report because the study for the current Quality of Life Index is now includes 249 cities. Manila, Philippines has dropped to number 249 on the list.
The Philippines has high rates of poverty incidence. In its latest report, the World Bank saw the poverty rate in the Philippines further declining to 19.8% in 2020 and 18.7% in 2021. The Philippines has overpopulation. Overpopulation in the Philippines is believed to cause sustained poverty and poor economic growth among families by depriving them of the financial resources that are required to secure education and adequate health care for their children. The Philippines suffers from low level of sanitation. Nearly 5 million people in the Philippines rely on unsafe and unsustainable water sources and 9 million lack access to improved sanitation. The Philippines generally doesn't have access to quality healthcare. Out of the 90 million people living in the Philippines, many do not get access to basic care. The country has a high maternal and newborn mortality rate and a high fertility rate. Philippines is still a low-income country. The Philippines remained as a low-middle-income economy according to the latest data from the World Bank. Philippines GNI per capita for 2019 was $3,850 and for 2018 was $3,710.
Technology in Third World. Technology for Third World, or we can also call developing countries or nation. The technological advancement is related in globalization to build up economic, health, educational, agriculture, and technological development. For agriculture, the ICA application for the Kenya. It can help the farmers to track the gestation period of the cows, monitor the health of their animals, and it can increase their productivity, income, improving animal health and crop yields. For education, World Reader non-profit organization provides free access to a library, digital books via e-reader and mobile phones. The mostly problem of third world country is health, the unsafe water, disease, pollution, climate change, and poisoning. Third world countries' health personnel mostly lack of equipment, adequate technology, and access to the high laboratories, and unable to diagnose and patient correctly. Fortunately, there are promising new tests and inexpensive, portable, easy-to-use diagnostic that are practical at even small local health center. The molecular diagnostic technology.
COVID-19 dealt a massive impact to all parts of the world, especially to those under the third world countries. The pandemic first struck the wealthiest countries in 2020, from China to the west coast of the US and to Europe as a result of their global interconnectedness involving trade and tourism. Public health responses aiming to reduce viral transmissions were implemented, such as physical distancing, hand washing, use of face masks, isolation of infected individuals, school closure, and economic lockdowns, which were proven effective in these future countries or the first world countries. However, these solutions would be difficult to implement in the third world countries where people often live in crowded and multi-generational households. They may not have ready access to food refrigerations, which requires food shopping, lack ready access to running water for hand washing, lack adequate sanitation, have poor or no internet for homeschooling or work from home, and have little to no savings to back up for the loss of income. And even basic necessities like soap is taken for granted in these countries.
In addition, many of the healthcare and public health systems in third world countries are compromised by the lack of equipment required to care for the COVID-19 patients, such as personal protective equipment, bedside oxygen supply, ventilators, pulse oximeters, ICU beds, and insufficient infection control training for healthcare workers. It also brought an extreme mass of work for our nurses, doctors, and other frontliners while getting not enough pay for their overtime. Furthermore, stay-at-home policies during the COVID-19 pandemic have imperiled the lives of many people dependent on each day's income to feed their families. Lots of companies or workplaces had no choice but to limit the days of work of its employees, or in the worst situation, had to reduce the number of its workers, because the negative economic effects of lockdowns have major effects on socioeconomically disadvantaged communities. Important components of the pandemic response planning include food rations, monetary support, and a clear and adequate plan for these communities to survive the crisis. To end this video, we'd like to pose a question. As a third world country, can we ever become a first world country?